Okay, so open up Package Manager console. Remember the shortcut we created before? Alt/period. Now install -package automapper. Add the version number here so you get the exact same experience as me. So in case in the future Automapper has a newer version and it's different, you don't run into issues. So the version I'm using is 4.1. Okay, beautiful. Now we need to create a mapping profile which determines how objects of different types can be mapped to each other. So in Solution Explorer, in app_start, add a new class. Call it mapping profile. We derive this class from profile, which is defined in Automapper namespace. Here we add a constructor and use mapper.createMap method to create a mapping configuration between two types. Now this is a generic method that takes two parameters, source and target. So I want to be able to map a customer to a customer DTO. I'm going to duplicate this. I also want to be able to map a customer DTO to a customer. When we call this createMap method, Automapper uses reflection to scan these types. It finds their properties and maps them based on their name. So this is why we call Automapper a convention-based mapping tool, because it uses property names as the convention to map objects. So here's our mapping profile. Now we need to load this when the application started. So in Solution Explorer, open up global.asax.c#. Here we use the mapper class defined in Automapper. Dot initialize. Here we need to pass an action. Now, whenever you see an action, you can pass a Lambda expression. If this doesn't make sense to you, check out my C# Advanced course on Udemy. Now here we pass C as in configuration, goes to c.addProfile. This is a generic method. And here we specify the type of our mapping profile. Mapping profile, which is defined in this namespace. Okay, so this was the setup code. Now back in the controller, in getCustomers method, first I'm going to change the return type to IEnumerable of customer DTO, defined in vidly.dto's namespace. Now we need to map these customer objects to customer DTO. So we use link extension method select. Here we need to pass a delegate that does the mapping. We can use mapper, the same mapper class defined in Automapper namespace. .map, generic method. We specify the source and target types. So we want to map customer objects to customer DTO. Now I'm going to remove this parenthesis because we're not going to call this method. If we call it, it gets executed. But here we need to delegate a reference to this method. Delete. That's it. Now let me show you another example. In getCustomer method, we're returning one customer object. So we cannot use the select extension method of link. Instead, we use mapper.map. Again, customer to customer DTO. And then pass this customer object as an argument to this method. Now we have this red underline because we need to change the return type of this method to customer DTO. Now let's take a look at another example. Create customer. So we should change this to customer DTO and also return customer DTO. Now here we need to map this DTO back to our domain object. So actually I would rather to change this. I'm renaming it to customer DTO. And then here I create a new customer object using mapper.map customer DTO to customer. and then pass this DTO here. Now, once we have the customer object, we add it to our context, call save changes. Now, this customer object has an ID that is generated by the database. So we want to add this ID in our DTO and return it to the client. So customer DTO.ID equals customer.ID. And the last example, which is a little bit different, update customer. First, we change the input to customer DTO and also rename this parameter. Now here, I'm going to use mapper.map. We want to map a customer DTO to a customer. But this time I'm going to pass two arguments to this method. The source object, which is our customer DTO, and the target object, which is customer in DB. In previous examples, I didn't pass a second argument to this method. So it created a new object and returned it, which we got here. But if you have an existing object, you can pass that here as a second argument. Now here, the reason I'm doing this is because this object is loaded into our context. Look, you're reading it here. So I want our DB context to be able to track changes in this object. Now we no longer need these few lines anymore. Also, we can see the generic parameters are grayed out because the compiler can infer from the objects we have passed to this method what are the source and target types. So we can get rid of that. So this is how we map objects using AutoMapper. Now, AutoMapper has a few features that you might find useful in certain situations. For example, if your property names don't match, you can override the default convention. Or you can exclude some of these properties from mapping. Or you may want to create custom mapping classes. To learn more about these features, you need to look at the AutoMapper documentation because that's really beyond the scope of this course. Next, I'm going to talk about camel notation.